Hello there, weary traveler. Welcome to the inn. Sit, rest your feet. Why, it's a long journey on the road to Tarvalon. Have a cup of tea, or maybe a frothy ale. The light. Why, you're just in time for the entertainment. Here are your hosts, Tracy and Amber.
An Aes Sedai never lies, but the truth she speaks may not be the truth you think you hear. Tam Althor.
Hello and welcome back. I'm here with my friend Tracy.
I'm here with my friend Amber.
And this is The Road to Tarvalon, a Wheel of Time podcast. Today we are covering the Ineptitude of the White Tower. It's been a long time coming.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, before we start, I think it's fair to mention that throughout its history, the White Tower certainly has had many accomplishments and Aes Sedai who were fierce champions of the light, but we are not going to talk about that today. So, buckle in.
Yeah, buckle in. So we will start out with a brief history of the White Tower itself, which will be spoiler-free, but once we make it past that, I will be sure to give a spoiler warning for anyone who is still reading the books.
Yeah. I'm excited because we have talked so many times about the things that the White Tower does that just really piss us off.
Yeah.
And
I feel bad because I don't want people to think that we're like, hate. But
right. Because some of our very favorite characters come from the White Tower, you know?
Definitely.
We have big love for a lot of the people and ideas that come out of the White Towers. The White Towers? There's only one. The White Tower.
The White Tower, the Little Tower, all the towers.
All the towers, exactly. So yeah, I love starting with the original purpose of Aes Sedai. I think it's really easy to see Aes Sedai as an all-female group of people and to forget that before the breaking, it was both genders and they were both referred to as Aes Sedai.
Definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, original purpose. Do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
Go for it.
Cool. So the White Tower in Tarvalon dates back to 98 AB, so after the breaking of the world. And female channelers needed a place to regroup and organize. But before the breaking of the existence of the White Tower, both men and women, as I said, were known as Aes Sedai, and they roamed all over the place.
They were everywhere.
Doing things. You know, they were productive Aes Sedai. Wouldn't that be nice?
They were aiding, they were helping the people.
Exactly. A lot of what they studied and what they did was in direct relation to how much of a benefit they could provide to all of humankind, really. That jumps right into the next thing of how Aes Sedai in the Old Tongue translates into servants of all. And so that was their purpose. That was their everything before the breaking.
I kind of picture them as the Red Cross or something,
Ooh.
Some organization that just kind of went and goes where it's needed.
Yeah.
But they had magical powers, so even better.
Even better. Wow. What would the Red Cross be like if it had magical powers?
Pretty badass.
That'd be pretty cool. So when at the beginning of Aes Sedai being Aes Sedai, there were 12 Ajas, but it dwindles down to 7 Ajas after the breaking of the world. And the thing about these Ajas that I find really strikingly different is how fluid they are. You don't choose an Aja for life. You choose an Aja because you have something in particular that for this century of your life you'd like to focus on, and maybe next century you'll be a different Aja.
Right. Whatever interest spoke to you at the time, you could kind of pick and choose, and you weren't forced to stick with this one Aja.
Yeah, which I think is really smart, because then you don't necessarily get attached to just one group. You have a benefit in mind for everyone involved. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's just a really smart way of setting things up, as we will talk about later. That is not exactly how things go when it goes post-breaking. Let's see here. Did we kind of talk about this, the first few centuries past the breaking?
The only thing I want to throw in there is, like, although things were a lot different, they did have to adhere to a really strict code of ethics. So
Yeah.
as we have seen, if you look at some of the history of even the Forsaken, they were once, Aes Sedai, and actually left their role as Aes Sedai because of this code of ethics.
Yeah.
So they did their own, like, self-policing.
But they don't, like, is there any mention that before the breaking that Aes Sedai had to be bound, like they have to be later, to the Three Oaths?
It was I know we talked about this in our Forsaken episode. We keep going, I'll look it up.
Okay. I do think that that's a good thing to mention for sure, because as you said, it like pushes people into like the directions they end up taking. So for the first few centuries after the breaking, the remaining female Aes Sedai are attempting to keep these 12 Ajas in place. And I think when I looked into it a little bit later, I think it said it took about 2 centuries before it dwindled down to 7. And those are the 7 that we know of now. And they're listed out by color, and we'll come to that a little bit later. And the other thing that I liked about this, because so often I feel as though, like, we read through the series or we talk about the series and it feels like nothing really changes over thousands of years, but there definitely is an indication that the original purpose of the 7 Ajas is not the purpose that they have now. So I think that's kind of, I like how it morphs. Like, who knows what the first ideas were around these Ajas. There's really nothing to say. Why did it dwindle down to 7 instead of 12?
Maybe they were into architecture and buildings, or making roads, or, who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we don't see as much in contemporary Aes Sedai as I feel we read about in, like, when we were talking about the Forsaken and the forming of the Forsaken and what roles they had in society along with being Aes Sedai, like, I feel as though the ideas of scientists and researchers was much more prevalent in the Age of Legends than it is after the breaking. So maybe that was the thing that they just dropped. They were like, well, I guess that's what the Brown Aj is going to do. And by the way, science is weird and we don't understand it anymore. So we're just not really going to mess with that too much. Yeah. So, and I mean, why would you when you have magic?
Yeah.
Science already does equal magic in my book. So I get why you would maybe leave tinkering like that aside.
Should I go into the
Yes.
Age of Legends?
Yes.
So another thing that's really cool about during this age is that Aes Sedai were very powerful, and they had more weaves and things they could do than the people that we see now in the books. So
yeah.
They could, okay, let's see here. They could tell the future. They it was reported that they could fly or become invisible. And like you had said previously, just studying sciences and philosophy and healing. And, they were generally revered by the people because they did create a better life for all. And you had put this in here about during the Age of Legends, they weren't locked away from the world. They behaved, more of a part of society.
Yeah, they didn't have quite the same clout and mystery that gets built up around Aes Sedai that we see later on. They're more like parts of your community that everyone is aware of and is familiar with and is like, oh yeah, that guy is an Aes Sedai, and a blade master, which seemed to be really common.
Oh, what an awesome role. Yeah.
I know, right? I can do magic and I'm deadly with a blade. The whole package. Yeah.
The whole package. Another thing that you have here is the hierarchy is not the same as what it would be later. So Lews Therin, who was the most revered Aes Sedai during the time of Legends, he did not have absolute obedience. So it wasn't like he says, follow me, you have to do what I say. It wasn't Yeah, it wasn't based on kind of like this. It's not based the same way as it is in the tower now.
It's true. Yeah.
And I also, something that I did think was interesting is that I felt like this kind of, the whole breaking of the world story is very similar to kind of the creation story in Christianity, because some channelers grew really curious and wanted to search for the source of the one power. And, you know, curiosity killed the cat. They
Absolutely.
they drilled into the boar and released the dark one. Kind of like, you know, the whole original sin situation. Yeah, oopsie.
Yeah.
But this, you know, it led to a great discovery, but also the collapse of society. And then after that, a war for power. And then, you know, this brings forth the taint on Saidin, the breaking of the world, and essentially an end of what Aes Sedai truly stood for.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting that the tower changes so much when it secludes itself away from the world. You know what I mean? Like, they hide behind walls and tradition and their pettiness on the inside, and really that's what then leads to the ineptitude of the White Tower, which is why we have to talk about it.
Before we jump into spoilers, I did find,
of course.
So when an Aes Sedai was found to be doing something that they shouldn't be, something like grievous, they would become bound as a criminal with the oath rod. And this was basically just used on violent criminals or people suffering from madness, and it's kind of like compels the person to never repeat their crimes again. And it was used kind of like instead of a death penalty. So
yeah. Wasn't that threatened against at least one of the Forsaken?
Yes, it was Semirag.
Yeah, that's right. Because they were like, if
torturing people.
Yep. If you keep torturing people, we're just going to have to
bound you to never do this again.
Do it again.
Or I think it was either that, or she could choose either become bound with this oath rod or become stilled. And she was like, see ya, joining the dark side or the dark one. So
they're similar. They're similar. I love that. I think it's so funny how many of the Forsaken like just make this change out of pettiness. Like it's one of the let's not talk about the Forsaken. We've talked about them already. But I love them.
So we can kind of, I think, talk about each individual Aja that we see in the Third Age, where it's just, you know, the 7. And this is something that we have brought up, I think, multiple times. I know the Red obviously is pretty easy because they did some pretty awful stuff. And we'll talk about some of that.
Vileness.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We'll talk about that. But for anyone who is reading or not finished with the series, you will want to bow out now because this is spoiler territory. We're very sorry. I hope you enjoyed this like 10-minute White Tower history. Or Aes Sedai history, excuse me.
Yeah, it's pretty brief, but we have a lot of things to say. I did go into the companion. Let's see here. So in the companion, it says that the blue Aja focused on causes, the brown on scholarship, the green Aja on battle, the gray Aja on mediation. I almost always want to say meditation there. Like every
That's
time
more
I
of a
see
white.
That. Yeah. The red Aja on dealing with male channelers, the white Aja on logic, and the yellow Aja on healing. And since this is spoiler territory, there was a secret 8th Aja whose existence was debated widely the Black Aja who served the Shadow.
And if you've never heard of the Black Aja before, I don't know what rock you are living under. Oh, God, because I think we talk about it every other episode. This
All
is
the
just
time.
Tracy is a secret Black Aja hunter. It is seriously, she will go through the books, she will pull things out and be like, okay, this person connected to this person, and we are going to talk about that later. But there's so many crazy things happening within the tower with the Black Aja. But first, the red. So the vileness happened. We've talked about that multiple times. It's in our New Spring wrap-up video.
Yeah.
It was awful. The Greens, how many times have we said, why aren't the Greens fighting in the Borderlands?
Every other episode?
Yeah. I mean, and I think the sad thing is, though, is that there were some Aes Sedai who were doing just that. But they were very, very early on, maybe like, I think she was one of the second Aes Sedai. But there were some Greens who were out there kicking ass and fighting Trollocs and doing what they were supposed to do. But as we get later in the book, it's just kind of like, Greens, get it together.
What are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing?
In New Spring, when Moraine is walking through the Green Aja's
yes.
quarters.
And they have don't they have weapons imprinted on the tiles in the Green Aja quarters?
And like on their doors and stuff. Like I think the one when she's passing through, it has like a bow and arrow or something on it.
How can you not be hype living in this environment?
Right? Exactly. And I think someone was watching their warders practice and why? It just seems like such a waste of abilities. We won't dig too deep in this because we've definitely griped about the Greens plenty of times.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The gray, I think with the gray, it's kind of funny because you would think like mediation would be probably the most useful thing in the moment, especially later on in the series where there's the Tower Schism. And they do kind of come into play in the very end of the book when Egwene is like, all right, like we have to come together. And the Grey sisters kind of like all put their heads together and are kind of like, like wheeling and dealing and
trying to figure shit out.
Yeah. And that was really cool to see. But where the heck were ya when all this was going down?
And also, if you're the Grey Aja and you have had years, if not centuries, to get good at what you're doing, how are you still being out-bargained by the sea folk later on?
Truth.
Right?
Truth.
This
Mind
is what I'm
blown.
super good at. And then you leave the ship and go, am I still clothed? I feel like she took my dress and maybe whatever jewels I was wearing in my hair.
My firstborn.
Everything's fucked, guys. We're not as good at this as we thought.
And I think too, one of the issues is that instead of, mediation and helping themselves out, they are basically being rerouted throughout the nations and politicking for other countries, which is just like, why don't you focus on your own backyard for a minute?
Right? Yeah. And I mean, later, it's not even always, and I mean, not that anything is ever a guarantee, but one of the little things that stuck out to me is a conversation that Swan has. And I don't remember who she's talking to, but she's trying to defend some action that the White Tower has done. Like they meddled in some war or border dispute, and I'm sure the Greys were sent out to make this shit happen. And the person that she's talking to is like, well, what happened to this prince? I have never heard of him. And she kind of like looks down and is like, well, he fell off of his horse and died a year later. So even all that meddling, is it really of benefit to the people you're trying to help? Yeah.
It's just it seems a lot more like just playing at politics than it is mediation.
Exactly. I agree with you completely. The Browns get my love, affection, respect, and
I love the Browns.
My plea to be included. Can I? I don't know how I feel about passing through Terangrials. Those things sound terrifying, but I'll take a shawl. Maybe a ring. Shawl. Yeah, that's cool.
I don't know. Like, I don't have a ton to really like hate on the brown Aja. Yeah. But if you're trying to like preserve all of this knowledge and you have this massive library in the White Tower, you are kind of an asshole if you do not make that library available to everyone. So like some people can get like a special invitation to come check out the books, but yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking stingy, but asshole absolutely works.
Like obviously, I'm sure there are some things that I don't know. I'm sure there are some things that people need to see and you're just like hiding it or what. And there are certain things in the history of what Aes Sedai have done that have been recorded that they probably don't want people to see.
Yeah. Well, isn't that what the 13th depository is for? Mm-hmm. Is that what that's for?
I have no idea.
Yeah. I might look that up because I feel as though I have a grasp of what that is and people talk about it like I should know what it is. And maybe as a Wheel of Time fan, I should. But I can't know everything.
There's so much information.
There is. But the Browns are like the keepers of knowledge and they're the people who are discovering things. But like you said, you know how like they're always like making notes and they're writing about stuff? Well, who are those notes for? Like...
themselves?
Maybe. Like, why don't you share that shit with people? That's good stuff.
So very secretive.
All of them. It's a bit annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the yellows.
Healers.
Why aren't y'all building some hospitals?
Right. Or at least, why aren't there like 2 or 3 available in the capital of each city? Like,
or just going around and teaching, non-channelers like basics, like this is some herbs that'll help with this, like even if you are a healer and you're only familiar with healing by channeling, like I feel like you should be able to do it all. You should have a firm knowledge of all of your herbs and medicines, but you should also be able to like channel and like delve and heal.
That's a really good point because think of how often, in particular, I'm thinking battles, like the Aes Sedai are stumbling around weakened from channeling to heal everyone.
Yeah, for like triage. You can't get to everyone all at once. Mm-hmm. So, and if once you run out of juice, you're going to have to like throw some herbs at someone and run off to the next.
Yeah, like I'm thinking about how Berelain had to tell the Tinkers when they were like bringing the wounded back from the fields of the last battle that they could only bring in people that they knew they could heal. And if you had instead people out there who knew how to like quick, like you said, triage and throw herbs at them, it would... That would be so, like, them
set
dissing
a broken
on...
bone. Yeah.
Yeah. Them dissing on Nynaeve always bothers me. Like, the more knowledgeable you are, the more well-rounded you are, the more you can help people.
It's so hateful, and it is so, like, I feel like it's just rooted in jealousy, and it's awful.
I don't like it. So the blue is, like, between... The blue and the brown is where I always sit for the if I were an Aes Sedai question. And I think it is because the blue is for causes. And I'm always that person who's outside like railing about whatever it is that I'm angry about or whatever. Like I throw myself wholehearted into just about everything I do.
Every project, yes.
Yeah. And
I can vouch for that.
Thanks. Anyway, and plus when I started reading the books, like the first blue we meet is Moraine.
Yeah.
And you're like, ooh. I was like 15. She like,
okay, here's what kind of I feel like I don't understand is because if you're in the Blue Aja, it's basically like I have a cause, but I feel like the Blue Aja kind of just falls through the cracks because I feel like each person is kind of acting alone unless you fall lower on the deference level and then you are told what to do, and someone might probably like tell you what your cause is or help with this. So it's kind of like if you're a blue, you're kind of screwed because what if you really have an interest in something but someone is like, well, you're a weak channeler, so take notes for me, and you can't say no.
Well, and even with like Moraine and Swan, when they first come to the blue quarters,
that's what happens. That's exactly what happens.
But they're already strong channelers, so for them it wasn't even just like the deference because of the difference, it was the deference because of the newness. And like Swan immediately gets roped into the eyes and ears, and Moraine is about to be pushed off to hand out the bounty.
Well,
and
that's
when
what's
she's
so
like,
tricky.
Peace, guys.
Yeah, that's what's so tricky is because at the time they didn't even know that they could say no, that they could be like, I'm more powerful than you. Piss off. So it is like all of these kind of like secrets and inner workings. And it's so, I mean, it has to be so stressful and so confusing. And how can you really get anything done when you're trying to, you know, walk a fine line? Yeah.
All the time.
All
the time. It's really frustrating. And also the fact that like, we're going to get into the power structure. So I will just wait until we get there because we still need to talk about the White Aja, who are all logic and probably amazing yoga teachers.
Oh, something else about the Browns. I talked about yellow for like building hospitals or something.
Yeah.
The Browns should be like building schools.
They should be. Or figuring out a weave that copies books.
Right?
You know? Like, wouldn't that be cool if they like were just like bibbity bobbity boo and you have
like
a new copy of this book?
Yeah. Like speech to text.
Yeah. Or even like that. I think it was a Terangriel that they found. Elaine found it when her and Avienda were going through the stuff that they brought back from
Abu Dar.
Meridian. Oh, yes.
Abu Dar.
No. You're right. Yeah.
Okay.
And one of them was like Avienda weaved into it, and it was like a bunch of books. Like, to me, it felt like a magic version of my Nook, you know, or if it was audio instead.
Yeah.
So one tiny version of part of an app on my phone. But I was like, ooh, that'd be cool. Like Elaine,
right? The Browns could use that.
Exactly. And Elaine knows how to like figure out how those exactly. Why aren't they hiring us to manage what they should be doing, Amber?
I don't know.
We could do it better. Okay.
So the White Aja is what we have last. And this one is kind of tricky because the only thing that really comes to mind with the White Aja is, you know, like their logic. I feel like the tower as a whole could use a lot more logic, but it just kind of never happens.
And maybe not from the Whites, because their idea of logic sometimes just leaves me scratching my head. So,
well, it's almost kind of like emotionless.
Exactly.
And the White Tower already is a pretty emotionless place. You're supposed to be serene at all times. So.
All times.
Yeah.
So
the Whites are just like the frowning police. Are you smiling and skipping through the halls? We will not have that here, young lady.
There's nothing logical about your behavior. Cease at once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
of all of them, I think I would choose, at this point in my life, I would most certainly be a Brown. You know? I also feel as though they're like potentially the least flawed, but that could just be my bias showing.
I think my problem is I'm so wishy-washy that I could never just pick one. So
See, and that's why I think the brown is perfect, is like, and this is something that I think all of the Ajas are still capable of doing should they choose to do it, is almost anything that one Aja does, a sister of another Aja will potentially know how to do things along those lines. Like Moraine is blue, but she's also good at healing. And so she's like developed and learned skills that make her better at that. So she's a little blue, she's a little yellow, she's a little brown.
But that's what's great about that's what's great about being a blue in the blue Aja, though, is you can pick and choose, like, this is my cause, you know?
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I like the blue too. There seems like there's a lot of autonomy. And while that's cool, it may not necessarily be the kind of thing that like is actually beneficial for your fellow sisters. So yeah.
So I think, is there anything that you want to say before we...
No, because I'm about to like yammer on about this whole power corrupts thing at any moment. So
yes. So my feelings in particular is that in many cases in history and in stories, power corrupts.
Absolutely.
But in the case of the White Tower, I feel like it's more like falling dominoes. There's not just one explanation or one reason. But as time passes on, there are so many cracks weakening the institution as a whole that things are kind of starting to crumble. And we're going to be going through some of these I would say symptoms, I guess. It's kind of like all of these little things that are going on in the inner workings of the tower that are really not doing them any favors.
Yes. Yeah.
They're weakening themselves.
So we have all of these symptoms, and I think that is a perfect word for it, because I mean, I feel like that's like a kind of a news thing, the symptoms of corruption. Like,
yeah.
And that's exactly like, if something's happening, I want to know the why. So we have like the taint on Sadine. This is the first thing that you wrote out here. And we've talked about this so many times too, like one of the big themes in the book being balance. And without Sadine, there's no balance to Sadar or the women who wield it. So what comes from it is not exactly the best thing for everyone involved. There's no balance there. And it was said that the greatest accomplishments of the Age of Legends were done when men and women worked together.
Well, yeah, they could create their circles, and they could do all of these wonderful, majestic things when they were creating a circle with both men and women. And they're not doing that anymore. So what have they lost? You know,
I think about that a lot, like, because that is also another big theme in the book, is things that have been lost or thought to be lost coming back. So traveling, dreaming, working together, men and women, like all of those things start to come back.
They were probably making Terangrial and flying around and traveling and doing all kinds of cool stuff. And now it's just lost. And one of the reasons is that men and women aren't working together anymore. And that's coming directly from the taint on Saidin. And the fact that now in the Third Age, the White Tower just does not want to have anything to do with male channelers.
Nope.
You're a male channeler, you're stuck with getting stilled or
gentled,
getting killed, or gentled or killed, basically. So and I think just as much as we see in how having predominantly male governments is not always a great thing, having a predominantly female government or body of power, as the Aes Sedai are, is not necessarily a good thing. And I like that it kind of flips it, because really, and we've talked about this before, it's one of the things that I'm really thankful that we've talked about, is like
it doesn't matter what your gender is, you can be evil. And I think that Robert Jordan taking the Aes Sedai on the direction that he does, that there isn't this balance. These women divide themselves into little groups and they become kind of backstabbing and petty and self-interested. Like, it's even said that when an Amerlin becomes an Amerlin, she's supposed to become the representative of all Ajas. But it's like an indisputable fact that almost all of them still cling to the Aja that they left behind. Like, Elida is such a good example of that. Like, all of her dresses being red and like everything around her is like red. And I don't know where I was going with that balance. Well, we were talking about balance.
But now that you're bringing up the red Aja, I think that's great, because something that kind of stood out for me is how not just that like the vileness happened and that the reds are pretty awful. It's that the red Aja has kind of created like a PR nightmare for the White Tower.
Seriously.
Now people are scared of Aes Sedai, and if you are a male channeler or you know someone who can channel that's a male, you're going to go into hiding. And you're always going to be looking over your shoulder. And something that really stood out to me was in The Shadow Rising. It's chapter 17. Tom is sitting in with Moraine, and Moraine is trying to kind of get some leverage on Tom to make him go to Tanchico with, I think it's, with Nynaeve and Elaine.
Yeah.
And the only way that she is able to get him to do it is in exchange for the names of who were responsible for the death of his nephew Owen. Yeah. And he asks her to leave, asks her to leave, and then she tells him she will teach him that not all Sedai are like those reds, and leaves. And then Tom she walks out and Tom starts crying like a baby.
Right.
And this just is all over like his grief of what happened to his nephew Owen, who could channel. And I love that this is brought up in the books, because you're still kind of confused about, like, well, I was anyways, like, what does it mean to be a male channeler? And, you know, what happens to these people? And I think it's really crucial to the story to have more focus on the red Aja and what it has caused for the tower, like what people are gonna be thinking about and how they're gonna be hiding from you in the future. And it's just kind of this, I don't know, it's really depressing, but it's one of these fucked up things about the tower.
Totally.
They're not trying to find another way. They're not trying to find another solution.
No. And at the time, for Tom, he was court barred to the Queen of Andor. So it's not like they went after someone who didn't have a connection to someone who like could potentially call down the Aes Sedai for their behavior, you know? But in this case, the thing that I think is important to remember is, I believe in that conversation, Tom says something about how like they hadn't killed him outright, but they had done everything short of killing him outright. Right. And that's what the red Aja would do, especially during the vileness, would be like either leave the man on his own to just slowly sink into despair and possibly kill himself,
or out him and leave him to an angry mob.
Exactly. So they weren't, I mean, they were not defiling their oaths. They weren't breaking the 3 oaths because they weren't outright killing them. And this is exactly why people distrust Aes Sedai. They can walk that line of truth like a master, like Elaine in sequined short pants.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that I want to bring up is just the general, like, refusal to admit failure on any level.
No kidding.
The very first thing that sticks out for me is in New Spring. It's chapter 25. So the tower is so obsessed with optics that when Malkier is falling,
This was exactly the part I thought of too.
Yeah, they couldn't reach it on time, so they led everyone to believe that they just didn't come, and they would rather people think that they were unhelpful or didn't care versus they failed.
Right.
And it's just so, I mean, it's so sad because in exchange, like to help Moraine, Lan asked why the tower never came to the aid of Malkier. And she tells them straight up, like they were dispatched, but they didn't come in time and they didn't want the world to know that they failed. So it is things like this that they are hiding that just makes everything so shady. And then I think another thing that stood out to me is even, okay, I love Swan Sanche. I adore her. But I mean, she's noble. She's a good person. But she is so, she just can't leave anything up to chance, and she can't refuse to set out of anything. There's that level and a need for control. And it's almost like bordering on obsession. So in the Shadow Rising prologue, she's talking to Min and she says, do you think we could just let him run loose? And she's talking about Rand. Headstrong and stubborn and untrained, unprepared, maybe going mad already. Do you think we could trust that to the pattern, to his destiny, to keep him alive like some story? And it's like, I wanted to be just like, Swan, how long has Moraine been telling you that he's Ta'Viren and that she has no control? No matter what Moraine does, she can't push Rand to do something. And he just kind of like snakes out of it. And Moraine or Swan just can't grasp that someone might not be able to control this person. And I think this is a really good person to look at because Swan is a very like good person, but she can't let go.
Yeah. And in her estimation of the situation, she is the watcher of the seals. You know, like she is the person who, as far as titles go and direct responsibilities go, the seals on the Dark One's prison are her personal responsibility.
Oh, I have something to say about that.
Ooh.
So this is literally what I wrote next. So, okay, the Aes Sedai themselves created the tower. They gave themselves this authority. It wasn't, it wasn't handed down. It wasn't like a vote amongst, the nations or something. They just did this. So, I mean, they even made their building higher than everyone else's. like how great is that? Like, we are above everyone. So they gave themselves this authority. And they decided for themselves, we are in charge. We watch the seals, and anyone who opposes us will be sorry. So they gave themselves this name, and I'm the watcher of the seals. Like, they created this institution themselves. So it's kind of like if one day you have a giant military and you're just like, I am king, emperor, god of the world, and everyone will do what I say. Like, who's going to oppose you if you have all that power? So
there's so many historical moments that are like bouncing through my head. Like I'm like you saying, like they gave themselves their own power and their own magnificent buildings.
This was not a democracy.
Yeah. And then like how many different emperors have there been, especially in like Eastern, Western, more Eastern Europe and like over into what would be considered like the Middle East and Asia and stuff. Like Rome was massive and at its biggest point.
I just want to say something. If I'm wrong about that, if there was a vote between the nations, someone let me know. But as far as I know, I don't think it went that way.
Well, I mean, that is the establishment of power. Like we were talking about Manetheren last week. And one of the things that we talked about was that after a while, like it was 2 centuries, they developed a system of nobility and royalty. And like, that wasn't anything that anyone was like, here, you take this power. It was kind of like people going, well, I'm good at leading and I can do
gonna
things
take
that
this power.
Yeah. And I mean, as so many things we've seen, the White Cloaks, I'm sure there were good intentions starting out, but then everything just kind of like takes a huge dive.
And that's why every time when an Amerlin is introduced or something and they're saying, I am the watcher of the seals, I just have to like give this big old eye roll. Like, okay, you are the watcher of the seals because you say so. Congratulations. Like,
good for fucking you.
But yeah, I mean,
I'm the queen of all things pink and glittery.
Right.
Thus declared. From now on when I walk into places.
Right. And I
Here she comes.
She comes. She comes.
The queen of all things glittery and pink. I wouldn't even like glitter that much, but I sure do like pink.
And I don't want this to come off
That's a really good point.
I don't want this to come off as me like hating on the White Tower because like we said, they have done some incredible things and these are characters that I love.
Right.
But there's also things that I feel like people need to pay attention to in this story.
Yeah, because I really didn't start seeing these. Like, of course, you have the big obvious schism that happens in the series, you know, and you're like, oh, okay, well, bad shit happens inside the tower. But it wasn't until I started really talking about it with you that I was
naive,
like,
Tracy. I was so naive.
Too.
I was like, oh, the schism. How the heck does that happen?
Exactly.
And then, like, when you look at it, you're like, oh.
Oh, okay. So, like, decades, if not centuries of undermining authority and using puppet Amerlins and you know, like it's like any governmental system that starts to lean towards the corrupt. It's not something that just happens overnight. It's something that builds up over time. And over time, the White Tower's just kind of fucked itself.
I was going to say, we're almost at 50 minutes. Do you want
Are we really?
Yeah.
You know what? This is actually a perfect break time because the next thing we're going to talk about is the toxicity leading up to the Black Aja. And I know people are going to be really surprised that this is one of my favorite things to talk about, considering what you said about me earlier. I can't help it.
You are
I'm a
Nancy
researcher.
Drew of Black Aja members, and I love it.
I hope I'm not disappointing today. I got like 4 hours of sleep. Let's see how good I do.
Same, and I've been painting all day. I have blue in my hair, but
yeah. Let's take a break and let's come back and talk about the fucking Black Aja.
Okay. All right.
I'll call you.
Okay.
Of course I do. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us. We will continue to release new episodes every Wednesday. We would love if you would subscribe to the podcast, leave us reviews, and share us with your friends in the Wheel of Time community.
Let us know what you thought of our content, correct us, send us things we may have missed. You can find links to our email and social media accounts in the show notes. And if you have the Anchor app, leave a voice message for us to play in upcoming episodes.
We also have a website where you can find links to our Discord channel, social media platforms, and merch shop.
So until next week.
Thanks for joining us on the road to Tar Valon.